While I was washing my car, I heard my wife screaming from the living room. I found a tied black bag and her belongings outside. Desperate, I found a note. Your past at the CIA has come to find you. Who ordered the Colombian boss killed? They had no idea what I was still capable of. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. My name is Albert Morrison, and I'm 58 years old. Until 3 days ago, I thought I knew exactly who I was and what my life had been. I was wrong about everything. It started on a Tuesday morning in October, the kind of crisp fall day when the leaves crunch under your feet and the air smells like distant wood smoke. I was out front washing my car, something I'd done every Tuesday for the past 15 years. Monica always teased me about it, calling it my old man routine. He'd bring me coffee and sit on the porch steps watching me work. But that morning, there was no coffee, no Monica on the steps. Instead, there were screams coming from inside our house. I dropped the hose and ran toward the front door, my heart hammering against my ribs. The screaming stopped abruptly, replaced by a silence that felt wrong, heavy. I burst through the door and found our living room in chaos. The coffee table was overturned, Monica's reading glasses crushed on the hardwood floor. Her favorite throw pillow was torn, stuffing scattered like snow. "Monica!" I called out, my voice cracking. "Monica, where are you?" Silence. That's when I saw the black garbage bag by the front door. It was tied tight at the top, bulging with contents I couldn't identify. Next to it, scattered across the floor, were Monica's belongings. Her purse, its contents spilled everywhere. Her wedding ring, the one I'd saved for 6 months to buy her 32 years ago. Her reading glasses case, empty and broken. My hands were shaking as I reached for the white envelope that had been placed deliberately on top of the bag. My name was written across it in block letters, the kind of handwriting that's meant to hide identity. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message that made my blood turn to ice. Albert Morrison, your past in the CIA has come back to find you. Who ordered you to kill the Colombian chief? You have 48 hours to remember, or Monica pays the price. We know what you did in Bogota in 1987. Confess, or she dies. I read it 3 times before the words actually registered. CIA, Colombian chief, Bogota. The paper slipped from my fingers and floated to the floor. The thing is, I couldn't remember any of it. I mean, I knew I'd served in the military. I had the uniform hanging in the back of our closet, the one Monica never wanted me to throw away. I had fragments of memories, pieces that felt more like half-remembered dreams than actual experiences, hot climates, the weight of a weapon in my hands, the taste of fear in my mouth. But details? Specific missions? Names? Dates? Locations? Nothing. I stumbled to the kitchen and poured myself 3 fingers of whiskey. Even though it was only 10 in the morning, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I tried to think, to force my mind back to those years, but it was like trying to grab smoke. The harder I reached for the memories, the more they slipped away. 1987. I would have been 23, maybe 24, fresh out of basic training, eager to serve my country. But Colombia? A chief? An assassination? The whiskey burned going down, but it didn't steady my nerves. I called the police first, but something in the dispatcher's voice when I mentioned the note made me hang up. He'd asked too many questions about my military service, about whether I'd been experiencing any episodes lately. Episodes? What the hell did that mean? That's when I noticed them. The neighbors across the street, Mr. and Mrs. Peterson, were standing at their window, watching my house. When I looked their way, they quickly stepped back, letting the curtain fall. It could have been innocent curiosity, but something about their posture, the way they'd been standing so still, so focused, made my skin crawl. I went to the front window and peered out through the blinds. A dark sedan was parked 3 houses down, one I'd never seen before. The windows were tinted, and I couldn't make out who was inside, but I could feel eyes on me, watching, waiting. My mind started racing. If these people knew about my past, if they knew enough to target Monica, then they'd been watching us for a while. They knew our routines, our habits. They knew I washed my car every Tuesday morning. They knew Monica would be alone in the house. I tried calling Monica's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Her voice, cheerful and familiar, asking callers to leave a message, felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I tried her sister in Phoenix, her book club friends, even her doctor's office, thinking maybe she'd had an emergency appointment. Nothing. No one had seen or heard from her. The house felt impossibly quiet. 32 years of marriage, and I'd never realized how much sound Monica brought to our lives. The soft padding of her slippers on the hardwood floors, the way she hummed while making coffee, the gentle rustle of magazine pages turning. Without her, the silence was oppressive. I found myself standing in our bedroom staring at her side of the bed. The sheets were rumpled, like she'd just gotten up. Her book was still on the nightstand, a bookmark saving her place on page 217. Everything looked normal, like she might walk through the door any minute and ask why I looked so pale. But she wouldn't. Someone had taken her, and it was because of something I'd done, something I couldn't even remember doing. That evening, as I sat alone at our kitchen table with a sandwich I couldn't eat, my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? My voice sounded hollow, defeated. Albert Morrison. The voice was electronically distorted, impossible to identify. You received our message. Where is she? I managed to ask. Where's my wife? Safe, for now. Have you remembered yet? I closed my eyes, pressing my palm against my forehead. I don't remember any of it. Colombia, the chief, none of it. Maybe you have the wrong person. A pause, then cold laughter. Oh, Albert, you remember? You just don't want to admit what you've done. But we have ways of helping people remember. The line went dead. I sat there in the dark, my untouched sandwich growing cold, and tried to understand how my quiet, predictable life had suddenly become a nightmare. Tomorrow, I would have to start digging into a past I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover. But Monica's life depended on it. I just had to figure out who I could trust to help me. Because looking at that dark sedan still parked down the street, I was beginning to suspect the answer might be no one. The last thing I remembered before finally falling into a restless sleep was the sound of footsteps on our front porch, slow and deliberate, like someone was taking their time, making sure I knew they were there. I woke up at 4:30 in the morning with my heart pounding and sweat soaking through my shirt. The dream had been vivid, but the moment I opened my eyes, it scattered like morning mist. There had been gunfire, the smell of jungle humidity, and a face I couldn't quite place. Someone calling my name, urgent and desperate. But was it a memory, or just my mind trying to fill in the blanks? The first thing I did was drive to the Veterans Affairs office downtown. If I'd really been CIA, there would be records, right? Something to prove or disprove what these people were claiming about my past. The clerk, a tired-looking woman named Sandra, pulled up my file on her computer. Albert Morrison, born 1963, enlisted 1981. She squinted at the screen. Says here you served in logistics, transportation division, honorable discharge in 1989. Logistics? I leaned forward. Are you sure that's right? She turned the monitor toward me. There it was, in black and white. No mention of special operations, no CIA connections, nothing about Colombia. Just 8 years of moving supplies and equipment around various army bases. But that didn't feel right. I had flashes of other things. The weight of different gear, the sound of helicopters, the taste of adrenaline. You don't get that from driving supply trucks. Is it possible there are classified records? I asked. Something that wouldn't show up in the regular files? Sandra gave me a look I'd seen before, the kind hospital nurses give confused elderly patients. Sir, if there were classified operations, I wouldn't be able to tell you about them anyway. But your service record is pretty straightforward. I left feeling more confused than before. Either these kidnappers had the wrong Albert Morrison, or someone had scrubbed my real military history clean. That's when I remembered I should call Helen. My sister Helen had always been the organized one in our family. If anyone would have kept track of family history, documents, anything that might help me piece together the missing pieces of my past, it would be her. She lived about 20 minutes away with her husband David, in one of those pristine suburban neighborhoods where every lawn looks like it was cut with scissors. I called from the VA parking lot. Helen, it's Albert. I need to talk to you about something important. Albert, you sound terrible. What's wrong? I almost told her everything right there, but something held me back. Maybe it was the way she asked, like she was expecting bad news. Can I come over? It's about my military service. I need to look at some old documents. Of course, honey. David's home too. We'll put on some coffee. The drive to Helen's house gave me time to think. She was 3 years older than me, which meant she would have been in her mid-20s when I was supposedly running around Colombia assassinating people. Old enough to remember if her brother had suddenly disappeared for months at a time. Old enough to notice if I'd come home different, changed. Helen answered the door with a worried expression and immediately pulled me into a hug. At 55, she still looked remarkably like our mother had. Same steel gray hair, same concerned eyes. You look exhausted, Albert. When's the last time you slept? Where's Monica? David called from the kitchen. She didn't come with you? That's when I noticed it. The way he asked about Monica, the tone in his voice. It wasn't casual curiosity. It was more like he was checking to see if I was alone. She's not feeling well, I lied. Helen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully. Do you remember anything unusual about my military service? Anything about me being deployed somewhere dangerous or coming home acting strange? Helen and David exchanged a quick glance. It was fast, probably meant to be subtle, but I caught it. Well, Helen said slowly, settling into her favorite armchair, you were different when you came back. Quieter. You had nightmares for a while. What kind of nightmares? David came in from the kitchen carrying 3 cups of coffee. You used to wake up screaming, he said matter-of-factly. Sometimes you'd call out names. Spanish names, I think. Isabel? Maria? Something like that. I felt a chill run down my spine. Do you remember Spanish names? You don't? Helen leaned forward. Albert, you went through a rough patch after your discharge. You were drinking too much, having trouble holding down jobs. That's when you met Monica, actually. She helped you get your life together. This was wrong, all wrong. I remembered meeting Monica at a church social in 1991. I'd been working at the hardware store for 2 years by then, stable and sober. I'd never had drinking problems, never had trouble with jobs. Helen, are you sure about that timeline? Because I remember things differently. Another look between her and David. This time, it lasted longer. Memory can be tricky after trauma, David said gently. Sometimes our minds protect us by changing details, making things seem better than they were. The important thing, Helen added quickly, is that you got help. Remember Dr. Hendricks? You saw him for almost 2 years. He really helped you work through the PTSD. Dr. Hendricks. That name rang a bell, but faintly, like an echo. I could almost picture a small office with leather chairs and diplomas on the wall. But had I been a patient there, or had I just driven Helen there for an appointment once? Do you still have his contact information? I asked. Oh, honey, Dr. Hendricks passed away years ago, Helen said. But Albert, why are you asking about all this now? You've been doing so well. You and Monica seem happy. The concern in her voice sounded genuine, but something underneath it felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced caring about my mental health. I've been having some memory issues, I said carefully. Gaps, things that don't add up. David set down his coffee cup. What kind of gaps? Colombia, 1987. Do either of you remember me talking about being there? The silence that followed was deafening. Helen's face went pale, and David's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Albert, Helen said finally, you need to be very careful about digging into those memories. Some things are better left buried. What do you mean? You worked so hard to put that behind you, she continued. Dr. Hendricks said the best thing for you was to focus on the present, on building a future with Monica. Looking backward would only hurt your progress. But I wasn't making progress anymore. I was 58 years old, and someone had kidnapped my wife because of something I supposedly did in a past I couldn't remember, if there was anything to remember at all. Helen, I need you to be straight with me. Do you have any documents from my military service? Any letters I might have sent home? Any photos? Anything? We might have some things in storage, David said. But Albert, maybe you should talk to Monica about this first. She knows more about your therapy than we do. Monica isn't available right now. They both stared at me, waiting for an explanation I wasn't ready to give. Listen, I said, standing up. If you find anything, any documents or photos, will you call me? This is important. Helen walked me to the door, her hand resting gently on my arm. Albert, promise me you'll be careful. Some memories are dangerous. Sometimes forgetting is a blessing. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that Helen and David knew more than they were telling me. The way they'd looked at each other, the things they'd said about my past, it all felt too convenient, too detailed for events that had happened over 30 years ago. And there was something else bothering me. When David mentioned the Spanish names I supposedly called out in my nightmares, he'd been very specific. Isabel, Maria, not common names you'd guess if you were making something up, which meant either my sister and brother-in-law had incredibly detailed memories about my trauma, or they knew exactly what had happened to me in Colombia because they'd been involved somehow. I was beginning to suspect that the people closest to me might be the ones I should trust the least. The breakthrough came from the most unlikely source, a box of old tax returns in my basement. I'd been searching through everything Monica and I had saved over the years, looking for any clue about my military service, when I found them tucked behind the water heater. Tax documents going back to 1989, the year after my supposed discharge. What caught my attention wasn't what was there, but what wasn't. According to the IRS forms, I'd been receiving military disability payments since 1990. Not a huge amount, maybe $300 a month, but steady. The interesting part was the disability code, PTSD related to classified operations. But according to my VA file, I'd been in logistics, transportation, nothing classified about moving boxes from one base to another. I called the VA disability office and spent 2 hours on hold before reaching a human being. The clerk who finally answered sounded bored until I mentioned the discrepancy between my service record and my disability payments. "Sir, I'm showing 2 different files under your Social Security number," she said after several minutes of typing. "That's unusual." "What do you mean, 2 files?" "One shows logistics, like you saw yesterday. The other shows special operations, classified deployment to South America, psychological evaluation recommended upon return. But this second file has a notation that it was amended in 1995. My hands started shaking. Amended how? The original file was sealed and a new one created. It says here the amendment was requested by family members due to patient confidentiality concerns during ongoing psychiatric treatment. Family members, Helen and David. Can you tell me who specifically requested the amendment? Helen Morrison and David Chen. They provided documentation showing they were handling your affairs during a period of, let me see, acute psychological distress. I hung up and sat in my kitchen, staring at the tax forms spread across the table. Helen had lied to me yesterday. She'd sat in her living room, looking concerned and sisterly, and fed me a story about my drinking problems and PTSD treatment, all while knowing she'd helped bury my real military records. Question was, why? I drove back to Helen's house, but this time I didn't call ahead. I parked across the street and watched for a while, trying to see the place with fresh eyes. It was a nice neighborhood, the kind where a retired teacher and her accountant husband should be living comfortably but not lavishly. Yet Helen's house was immaculate, professionally landscaped, with a brand new Lexus in the driveway. David's car was a Mercedes, maybe 2 years old, on a teacher's pension and an accountant's salary. Even with good savings, that seemed like a lot of luxury. I walked up to the front door and rang the bell. Helen answered, and for just a moment before she composed her face, I saw something that looked like panic. "Albert, 2 days in a row, what a nice surprise." But her smile was tight, forced. "David's not here. He had to run some errands." "That's okay. I wanted to talk to you alone anyway." I followed her into the living room, the same place where she'd told me yesterday about my supposed drinking problems and mysterious trauma. Everything looked exactly the same, but now it felt different. Staged. "Helen, I found something interesting in my tax records." I pulled out the disability payment statements. "Did you know I've been receiving payments for PTSD related to classified operations?" Her face went white. "Albert, I think you should sit down." "I am sitting down. I want you to explain why you lied to me yesterday." She was quiet for a long time, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. Finally, she sighed. "We were trying to protect you." "From what?" "From yourself. Albert, you came back from Colombia in 1987 completely broken. You couldn't sleep, couldn't hold a conversation, couldn't function. You kept talking about things that would have gotten you in serious trouble if the wrong people heard." "What kind of things?" "Names, operations, details about missions that were supposed to be classified. You were a liability, Albert. David and I were terrified you were going to end up in prison or worse. I felt like I was hearing this through underwater." "So you had my records changed?" "Dr. Hendricks suggested it. He said sometimes the best treatment for severe PTSD is to let the patient forget, to give them a new narrative they can live with. So we worked with the VA to create a cleaner version of your service record and the disability payments." Helen looked uncomfortable. "Those were compensation for agreeing to the treatment program. The government didn't want any loose ends from the Colombia operation." "What Colombia operation, Helen? What did I do there?" She shook her head. "I can't tell you that. Dr. Hendricks made us promise never to bring up the details, even if you asked. He said it could trigger a complete breakdown." I stood up, pacing to the window. The story was starting to make a horrible kind of sense, but something still felt wrong. "Where's Dr. Hendricks's file on me, his notes from our sessions?" "Albert, I told you yesterday he passed away years ago." "When exactly?" 2008, I think, maybe 2009. I turned back to face her. "Helen, Dr. Hendricks died in 2015. I looked him up online last night." The color drained from her face completely. I might have gotten the date wrong." "You might have gotten the date wrong about the man who supposedly saved my sanity? The doctor who treated me for 2 years?" She didn't answer. "Where's David, Helen? Really? I told you he's running errands." "What kind of errands?" Another long silence. Then, so quietly I almost missed it, "He's with Monica." My blood turned to ice. "What did you just say?" Helen started crying. Real tears this time, not the controlled emotion she'd been showing me. "Albert, you have to understand, we never meant for it to go this far." "Go how far?" "Helen, what the hell is going on?" "The Colombia story, the classified operations, all of it. We made it up." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. "You made it up?" "David found out about a loophole in VA benefits. If someone had documented PTSD from classified operations, they could receive disability payments without the usual verification process. The operations were classified, so the VA couldn't check the details. You've been collecting disability payments under my name?" "Not just the disability payments. There are other benefits. Medical coverage, housing allowances for veterans with severe psychological conditions. Over the years, it's been almost $2,000 a month. $2,000 a month for over 30 years. That was over $700,000. Jesus Christ, Helen. You've been running a disability scam using my identity? We needed the money. David's accounting practice wasn't doing well, and my teacher's salary wasn't enough. We were about to lose the house. So you decided to turn your brother into a fake veteran. We thought it would just be temporary, just until David got back on his feet. But then the payments kept coming, and it became easier to just continue. I felt sick. And Monica? How does Monica fit into this? Helen wiped her eyes with a tissue. She found out about 6 months ago. She was helping you organize papers for tax season and discovered some of the benefit statements. She figured out what we'd been doing. So she confronted you? She tried to blackmail us. The room started spinning. My wife, my partner of 32 years, had discovered my sister was running a disability scam in my name, and instead of telling me about it, she'd tried to profit from it. What did she want? Half the money. She said if we didn't give her half of everything we'd collected, she'd report us to the VA. She'd make sure we went to prison. And this kidnapping story? Helen's voice was barely a whisper. David's idea? He said if we made you think Monica had been kidnapped because of your military service, you'd be too confused and scared to ask the right questions. We just needed time to figure out how to handle the situation. Handle what situation? Monica wasn't satisfied with half the money. Last week she said she wanted everything. all the back payments. Plus, she wanted us to sign over the house as collateral for keeping quiet. I sat down heavily, my head spinning. So you decided to what? Keep her somewhere until she agreed to reasonable terms? David thought if we scared her a little, made her think she was in real danger, she'd be more willing to negotiate. Where is she, Helen? David's storage unit, the one out on Highway 12. She's safe, Albert, I swear. We've been bringing her food, making sure she's comfortable. How long have you been planning to keep her there? Helen looked down at her hands. Until you figured out that your military service never happened and stopped looking for CIA connections. David thought once you realized there was no classified operation to remember, you'd assume the kidnappers had made a mistake and let it go. And then what? Monica just comes home and pretends nothing happened? We were hoping she'd see reason, accept a fair split of the money, and agree to keep quiet about the disability fraud. I stood up and walked toward the door. I'm going to get my wife. Albert, wait. Helen grabbed my arm. If you bring Monica back now, if this all comes out, David and I will go to prison. It's been 30 years of fraudulent benefits. We could be looking at 20 years. I looked at my sister, this woman I'd trusted my whole life, who'd been stealing from the government in my name since I was in my 20s. Helen, you should have thought about that before you decided to kidnap my wife. She's not really kidnapped, she's just contained until we can work this out. I pulled my arm free. The difference is a lot smaller than you think. As I walked out, Helen called after me. Albert, please, there has to be another way. But I kept walking. I had a wife to rescue and a 30-year-old lie to untangle. And for the first time since this nightmare started, I was beginning to understand who the real enemy was. It wasn't Colombian assassins or CIA cover-ups. It was my own family, and they'd been robbing me blind for 3 decades. The storage facility on Highway 12 looked like the kind of place where people kept old furniture and Christmas decorations, not kidnapped wives. I sat in my car across the street, watching David's Mercedes parked in front of Unit 47, trying to figure out my next move. I'd driven straight there from Helen's house, my mind reeling from everything she'd told me. 30 years of fraud. My own sister using my identity to steal from the VA while I lived a normal, honest life, completely unaware that I was supposedly a disabled veteran collecting benefits for trauma I'd never experienced. And Monica, my wife of 32 years, who discovered the scam and decided to cash in rather than protect me. I called 911 first, but when the dispatcher asked what kind of emergency, I hesitated. How do you explain that your wife is being held in a storage unit by your sister and brother-in-law as part of a disability fraud scheme? It sounded insane even to me. Sir, are you there? Never mind, I said, and hung up. I needed to see Monica first, to understand exactly what had been happening and how deep this conspiracy went. Then I could decide who to trust with the truth. David was just coming out of the storage unit when I walked up. He saw me and froze, a grocery bag in one hand and a bottled water in the other. Albert. He looked like he'd been caught stealing from the church collection plate. What are you doing here? Helen told me everything. I want to see my wife. David glanced around nervously. Look, I know how this must seem, but Monica's fine. She's been very reasonable about the whole situation. Reasonable about being kidnapped? She's not kidnapped. We're just having an extended negotiation. I stepped closer to him. David was a soft man, someone who'd spent his whole adult life behind a desk, pushing papers and avoiding confrontation. I was bigger than him, and right now, I was angrier than I'd ever been in my life. Open the unit, David. He fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking. The metal door rolled up with a screech, revealing a space that looked like a makeshift apartment. There was a camping chair, a small folding table, several blankets, and a battery-powered lantern. And there was Monica, sitting in the chair reading a paperback novel, looking remarkably calm for someone who was supposed to be a kidnapping victim. Hello, Albert, she said, without looking up from her book. I wondered when you'd figure it out. I stared at her. She was dressed in clean clothes. Her hair was combed, and she had a cup of what looked like fresh coffee sitting on the table beside her. This wasn't a woman who'd been terrorized and held against her will. Monica, what the hell is going on? She set down her book and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating. David, Give us some privacy. David hesitated. Monica, I don't think... Go sit in your car, David. Albert and I need to have a conversation. He backed away from the storage unit like Monica was a dangerous animal, which I was beginning to realize might not be far from the truth. Monica gestured to a second camping chair that had been folded against the wall. Sit down, Albert. We have a lot to discuss. I didn't sit. Start talking. Helen and David have been very generous over the years, she said, crossing her legs like we were having tea in our living room, instead of talking in a storage unit. The disability payments you've been receiving have helped us maintain a very comfortable lifestyle. Disability payments I never knew about. Of course you didn't know. That was the whole point. She picked up her coffee and took a sip. Albert, you're a good man, but you're not a practical man. If you'd known about the extra income, you would have worried about where it came from, whether we deserved it, whether it was legal. You would have made us return it. Because it's fraud, Monica. It's theft. It's survival. Do you think we could have afforded this house on your hardware store salary? Do you think we could have taken those vacations to Europe, bought new cars every few years, sent money to your cousin when his business failed? I felt like I was talking to a stranger. We could have lived within our means. Your means were pathetic, Albert. $400 a week at the hardware store, no real prospects for advancement, no pension worth mentioning. Helen and David gave us a chance at a real life. By lying to me for 30 years, Monica shrugged, by protecting you from decisions you weren't equipped to make. I finally sat down, not because I wanted to be comfortable, but because my legs felt weak. How long have you known? I've always known. Helen approached me before we were married, explained the situation, asked if I was willing to be discreet. The marriage gave the whole arrangement more legitimacy. A disabled veteran with a stable home life, a caring wife who helped manage his affairs. You married me for the disability payments? I married you because you were kind and predictable and wouldn't ask too many questions. She set down her coffee cup and leaned forward. Albert, I genuinely came to love you over the years. This isn't personal. You've been lying to me since the day we met, and it's not personal. I've been protecting you. All of us have. You've lived a happy life, haven't you? You've felt useful, loved, secure. None of that was fake. The only thing that was fake was the source of our financial stability. I thought about our life together. The house we'd bought in 1993, a place I'd thought was stretching our budget. But Monica had insisted we could afford. The new cars that appeared every few years, always with Monica handling the financing, the vacations, the dinners out, the expensive gifts at Christmas. How much money are we talking about, Monica? The disability payments have been about $2,000 a month for over 30 years. That's over $700,000. But there have been other benefits too. Medical coverage, housing allowances, education credits, probably close to $1 million total. $1 million, stolen in my name, with my social security number, using a false military record created by my own family. And you decided 6 months ago that you wanted a bigger share? Monica's expression hardened. I decided 6 months ago that I deserved recognition for 30 years of keeping this secret. Helen and David were taking most of the money and leaving us with just enough to maintain appearances. I wanted a fair split. So you blackmailed them. I negotiated with them, but they weren't being reasonable. So you agreed to this kidnapping charade? David's idea was actually quite clever. Create a crisis that would distract you from asking questions about our finances while giving me leverage to pressure Helen and David into a better arrangement. I stared at her. You wrote that note about the Colombian chief, the CIA? David wrote it, but yes, it was my idea to use your supposed military service as the hook. We knew you didn't remember any actual operations because there weren't any to remember. And the phone call? The distorted voice threatening to kill you? Helen's neighbor's teenage son, David, paid him $50 to make the call. I felt physically ill. Monica, do you understand what you've done? You've been committing federal fraud for 3 decades. You've been stealing from the VA, from programs meant to help actual veterans with real injuries. I've been securing our future, she said firmly. Albert, where do you think we'd be right now if I hadn't agreed to help Helen and David? You'd be 68 years old working part-time at the hardware store, and we'd be living in some rundown apartment, eating canned soup and worrying about how to pay for your medications. We'd be honest. We'd be poor, and poor people don't get to be noble about honesty. I stood up and walked toward the entrance of the storage unit. The whole conversation felt surreal, like I was trapped in someone else's nightmare. "Where are you going?" Monica asked. "Home. To think about what to do next." "Albert, before you make any rash decisions, you should understand something. If this comes out, you'll be implicated too. 30 years of cashing disability checks, living off benefits you never earned. No one's going to believe you didn't know." I turned back to look at her. Is that a threat? It's a reality? We're all in this together now. The best thing for everyone is to find a way to move forward that protects all of us, including continuing the fraud, including being smart about how we handle a complicated situation. I walked out of the storage unit and headed toward my car. Behind me, I heard Monica calling my name, but I didn't turn around. David was leaning against his Mercedes, smoking a cigarette with shaking hands. When he saw me, he straightened up. "Albert, we can work this out. There's enough money for everyone if we just—" "David, shut up." I got in my car and drove home, my mind spinning with everything I'd learned. My wife had been lying to me since before we were married. My sister had created a fake military identity for me and had been collecting disability payments in my name for 3 decades. And all of them seemed to think the biggest problem was how to continue the fraud without getting caught. But what Monica had said was probably true. If this came out, I would look complicit. 30 years of benefits, a comfortable lifestyle I should have known was beyond our means, a wife who managed all our finances while I stayed deliberately ignorant. I was trapped in a conspiracy I'd never agreed to. And the people who'd created the trap were counting on me to stay quiet to protect myself. The question was, what kind of man was I willing to be? I spent that night sitting in my kitchen, staring at a bottle of pills Monica had been giving me for what she called my memory issues. Little white tablets that I'd been taking every morning for the past 2 years, trusting that my wife knew what was best for my health. But now, I was wondering what else I'd been trusting her with. I dumped the pills into my palm and examined them closely. There was no pharmacy label, no indication of what they actually were. Monica had always told me they were supplements, something to help with the occasional confusion and forgetfulness that comes with getting older. I'd never questioned it, just like I'd never questioned the extra money that seemed to appear whenever we needed it, or why Monica always handled our taxes and financial planning, or why she discouraged me from getting too involved in managing our affairs. For 30 years, I'd been sleepwalking through my own life. I flushed the pills down the toilet. The next morning, I called in sick to the hardware store and drove to the public library. If Helen and David had been collecting disability benefits in my name, there would be records, paper trails, evidence that could either prove or disprove their story about my supposed military service. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. The librarian helped me access military records, databases, and federal benefits tracking systems. According to the official documentation, Albert Morrison had served in special operations from 1981 to 1989, with classified deployments to Central and South America. His psychological evaluation upon discharge noted severe PTSD, memory fragmentation, and recommended ongoing psychiatric care. But here was the interesting part. The original file had been created in 1990, 3 years after my supposed discharge, and amended multiple times over the years. Each amendment had been requested by either Helen Morrison or David Chen, acting as my designated representatives during periods of psychological incapacity. They hadn't just created a fake military record. They'd been updating and maintaining it for decades, adding details and symptoms as needed to justify continued benefits. I printed everything and took it home, spreading the documents across my kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Every time the VA had requested updated medical evaluations, Helen and David had provided them. Every time my disability rating had been reviewed, they'd submitted new documentation of my ongoing trauma and inability to manage my own affairs. And the medical documentation was all signed by Dr. Hendricks, the psychiatrist who supposedly had treated me for 2 years and who Monica claimed had died years ago. I looked up Dr. Hendricks online. He was very much alive, still practicing in the same office downtown where Helen had claimed he'd helped me work through my PTSD. I made an appointment for that afternoon. Dr. Hendricks was a thin man in his 70s, with kind eyes and a gentle manner. His office was exactly as I'd half remembered it: leather chairs, diplomas on the wall, the smell of coffee, and old books. "Mr. Morrison," he said, shaking my hand. "It's been a while. How are you feeling?" I sat down across from his desk, studying his face carefully. "Dr. Hendricks, I need to ask you some very direct questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me." He raised an eyebrow. "Of course. What's troubling you? Have you been signing medical evaluations for my VA disability claims?" His expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "Albert, you know I can't discuss the specifics of your treatment. Patient confidentiality. I'm not asking about treatment. I'm asking about paperwork you've been signing regarding my military service and psychological condition." A long pause. "What exactly do you remember about our sessions?" "That's just it, Dr. Hendricks. I don't remember any sessions, but according to VA records, you've been providing ongoing evaluations of my PTSD and recommending continued disability benefits for over 20 years. He was quiet for a moment, then reached for a thick file from his cabinet. "Albert, this is very concerning. Your sister and brother-in-law have been bringing you here every 6 months for the past 23 years. You've had severe memory issues related to your military trauma. Sometimes you don't remember our previous sessions, but we've never had a conversation like this one." "What do you mean?" "You're different today, more focused, more present. Usually when you come in, you're somewhat disoriented, often confused about dates and details. Your sister explained that you have good days and bad days, and that the medication helps manage your symptoms." The medication? Those little white pills Monica had been giving me every morning. "Dr. Hendricks, what medication are you referring to?" He consulted the file. "Lorazepam, 2 milligrams daily. Your sister said you've been taking it for years to help with anxiety and memory issues related to your military service." Lorazepam. I looked it up on my phone while sitting in his office. It was a powerful sedative used for anxiety disorders, but also known to cause memory problems, confusion, and disorientation when used long-term. They'd been drugging me. For years, Monica had been giving me medication that would make me confused and compliant, ensuring I wouldn't ask too many questions about our finances or my own medical treatment. "Dr. Hendricks, I need to see your complete file on me." "Albert, I'm not sure that's advisable, given your condition." "What condition?" "The condition where my family has been drugging me for decades while collecting disability benefits in my name for a military service that never happened." His face went pale. "I'm sorry, what are you saying?" I pulled out the documents I'd printed at the library and spread them across his desk. "I'm saying that Helen and David have been running a disability fraud scheme using my identity, and you've been providing the medical documentation to support it." Dr. Hendricks studied the papers, his expression growing more troubled by the minute. "Albert, these evaluations, I wrote these based on your symptoms and your family's reports of your condition. If your military service didn't happen, then every evaluation you've written has been based on lies." He sat back in his chair, looking suddenly older. "Your sister and brother-in-law have been paying for your sessions out of pocket for over 20 years. They said your military insurance covered psychiatric care, but they preferred to handle the payments directly to ensure continuity of care." "How much have they been paying you?" $300 per session, twice a year. Sometimes more if I needed to write additional evaluations for your disability reviews. $300 twice a year for 23 years. That was almost $14,000 they'd paid Dr. Hendricks to maintain their fraud, money that had almost certainly come from the benefits they were stealing in my name. "Dr. Hendricks, I need you to understand something. I've never had PTSD. I've never had memory problems except when I was taking the medication my wife was giving me. Everything you've documented about my condition has been manufactured." He was quiet for a long time, reviewing the file with new eyes. Finally, he looked up at me. "If what you're saying is true, then I've been an unwitting accomplice to fraud. But Albert, this is very serious. If these benefits have been obtained illegally..." "I know. That's why I need your help to document the truth. What do you want me to do? I want you to evaluate me right now, today, with no medication in my system and no family members providing background information. I want you to document my actual mental state and cognitive function. Dr. Hendricks spent the next 2 hours putting me through a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation, memory tests, cognitive assessments, psychological questionnaires. When we were finished, he reviewed the results with a puzzled expression. Albert, you're showing no signs of PTSD, no memory impairment, no cognitive dysfunction. Your test results are completely normal for a man your age. And how does that compare to the evaluations you've been writing for the VA? He pulled out several of his previous reports. These describe severe ongoing trauma, significant memory loss, inability to manage personal affairs, recommendation for continued psychiatric supervision. He trailed off, shaking his head. The person I evaluated today bears no resemblance to the patient described in these reports, because the patient in those reports doesn't exist, never did. Doctor. Hendricks sat quietly for several minutes, absorbing the implications. Albert, if your family has been deceiving me about your condition, if they've been using my medical credentials to support fraudulent benefit claims, then they've been using you just like they've been using me. He nodded slowly. What do you plan to do? I'm going to stop them. But first, I need to understand exactly how deep this goes. I left Dr. Hendricks's office with a detailed psychiatric evaluation documenting my complete mental competency and a promise that he would review all of his previous reports on my case. If my family had been manipulating him into providing false medical documentation, he wanted to know about it. But more importantly, I now had proof that I was not the confused, medicated, psychologically fragmented man my family had been portraying me as for decades. I was clear-headed, competent, and finally beginning to understand the full scope of what had been done to me. When I got home, Monica was waiting in the kitchen. She'd apparently convinced David to let her out of the storage unit, probably confident that I would come around to their way of thinking once I'd had time to consider my limited options. Albert, thank goodness. I was worried when you didn't come home last night. I looked at her sitting at our kitchen table, the same table where she'd been serving me drugged coffee every morning for years, and felt a cold anger settle in my chest. Monica, we need to talk. Of course, honey. I think you'll find that once we discuss this rationally. Shut up. She blinked, startled. In 32 years of marriage, I'd never spoken to her like that. Excuse me? I said, shut up. You've been talking for 30 years. Now it's my turn. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, Monica looked genuinely afraid, and she should have been, because the man she'd been married to, the confused, compliant, medicated man who never asked difficult questions, was gone. In his place was someone she'd never met before, someone who was done being manipulated. Monica's face went through several expressions as I stared at her across our kitchen table. Confusion first, then wariness, and finally something that looked like calculation. She was trying to figure out how to regain control of the situation. She couldn't. I was done being controlled. Albert, you're scaring me. You don't sound like yourself. That's because you've never met myself, Monica. You've only known the drugged version. Her eyes flicked toward the cabinet where she kept my supplements. The cabinet I'd already emptied. I don't know what you're talking about. I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos I'd taken of the lorazepam information from Dr. Hendricks's office. 2 milligrams daily, enough to keep someone confused and compliant for decades. She was quiet for a long moment, then sighed like I was being unreasonable about something minor. Albert, you needed those medications. You were having severe anxiety, memory problems. I was having a normal life until you started drugging me. You were struggling. After your military service, you had nightmares, confusion. I never served in special operations, Monica. There was no military trauma. Helen and David made it all up, and you've known that from the beginning. Her composure finally cracked. Fine. Yes, I knew. But Albert, what was I supposed to do? When Helen approached me in 1990, you were working at the hardware store making barely enough to survive. She offered me a chance at a real life, security, a future. She offered you a chance to defraud the federal government, She offered me a chance to take care of you. Do you think you would have been happy living paycheck to paycheck for your entire life? Do you think you would have been able to afford this house, our cars, the vacations we've taken? I would have been happy living an honest life. You would have been miserable and poor. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the yard I'd been maintaining for decades. The garden Monica had always complimented me on, the life I'd thought was real. Monica, I want you to pack your things and leave. Albert, be reasonable. We can work this out. The money is already spent. The benefits have been received. There's no putting that genie back in the bottle. The practical thing to do is figure out how to move forward. The practical thing is for you to get out of my house. It's our house. I've been making the mortgage payments for 30 years. With stolen money. With money that gave us a good life. Albert, if you turn us in, you'll be implicated too. You've been receiving these benefits, living off this income. No prosecutor is going to believe you were completely innocent. She was probably right about that. But I'd made my decision. Maybe not, but I'm willing to take that chance. Monica stood up, her voice taking on the sharp edge I'd heard in the storage unit. If you try to destroy this family over your sudden moral awakening, I will make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you really are. Weak, gullible, so pathetic that your own wife had to manage every aspect of your life because you were too incompetent to do it yourself. You're probably right about that, too. Albert, pack your things, Monica. You have 1 hour. She stared at me for a long moment, then laughed bitterly. You have no idea how to live without me. You don't know how to pay bills, manage insurance, handle taxes. You don't even know what medications you're supposed to be taking. I guess I'll figure it out. And when this all comes crashing down, when the VA investigates and you're facing federal charges, don't come crying to me for help. I won't. She went upstairs and I could hear her moving around, opening drawers, slamming closet doors. An hour later, she came back down with 2 suitcases and a look of cold fury. This isn't over, Albert. Yes, it is. After she left, I sat in the quiet house and made a list of everything I needed to do. It was a long list. First, I called the VA fraud hotline and reported the false claims that had been made in my name. The investigator I spoke with seemed unsurprised by my story. Apparently, disability fraud involving fake military records was more common than I'd realized. Mr. Morrison, based on what you're telling me, this investigation could take several months. You should be aware that if benefits were received fraudulently, there could be criminal charges and restitution requirements. I understand. You may want to consult with an attorney. I will. Next, I called Helen. She answered on the first ring, probably hoping I was calling to tell her I'd come to my senses. Albert, thank goodness. Monica said you threw her out of the house. Surely you can't be serious about... Helen, the VA is investigating the disability claims. You and David need to get lawyers. Silence. Albert, you can't do this. We're family. No, we're not. Family doesn't steal from each other for 30 years. We took care of you. We made sure you had a good life. You took care of yourselves and used me to do it. If this comes out, David and I could go to prison. Yes, you could. Albert, please, think about what you're doing. Think about the consequences. I have been thinking about the consequences. For 3 days, that's all I've been thinking about. I hung up before she could say anything else. The investigation took 6 months. During that time, I lived alone in the house, learning how to manage my own affairs for the first time in my adult life. It was harder than I'd expected, but not as hard as Monica had predicted. I figured out how to pay bills, how to balance a checkbook, how to deal with insurance companies and tax forms. I also started sleeping better than I had in years. Without the daily dose of lorazepam, my mind felt clearer, sharper. I began remembering things from my real past, not the fabricated military service, but actual memories of my younger years that had been dulled by decades of medication. Helen and David were arrested in January. The charges included conspiracy to commit fraud, theft of government benefits, and identity theft. The total amount they'd stolen came to just over $1,200,000. Monica was charged as an accessory, but she'd made a deal with prosecutors to testify against Helen and David in exchange for a lighter sentence. Even facing potential prison time, she was still looking for an angle to work. Dr. Hendricks was cleared of any wrongdoing. The investigation determined that he'd been an unwitting victim of the scheme, providing legitimate medical evaluations based on false information provided by my family. I was never charged with any crimes. The investigators concluded that I'd been drugged and manipulated, essentially a victim of the fraud, rather than a participant in it. But I still had to pay restitution. The house had to be sold to cover part of what was owed to the VA. I moved into a small apartment downtown, walking distance from the hardware store where I still worked. It was a simple life, maybe even a poor life by Monica's standards, but it was honest. Helen was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. David got 6 years. Monica received 2 years of probation and community service, but she'd lost everything else. The divorce was finalized while she was testifying at Helen's trial. I saw her one last time outside the courthouse after the sentencing. She looked older, tired, defeated. "Albert," she said, approaching me hesitantly, "I know you probably don't want to talk to me, but I wanted to say something." I waited. "I'm sorry. Not about the money, not about the scheme. I'm sorry that you had to find out this way. I'm sorry that we couldn't have just lived our lives and been happy. We could have, Monica. We could have been happy with a lot less money and a lot more honesty. Maybe, but I'll never know now. Will I?" She walked away, and I never saw her again. A year later, I was working in the hardware store when a woman came in looking for help with a plumbing problem. Her name was Ruth. She was 53 years old, and she'd recently moved to town after her own divorce. She was a retired teacher, lived in a small house near the lake, and had a laugh that reminded me why I'd once believed in the possibility of happiness. We started having coffee together on Sundays, then dinner on Fridays. She knew my story, the whole truth about the fraud and the investigation, and the family that had betrayed me. She didn't care. "Albert," she said one evening as we sat on her porch watching the sunset, "do you ever regret it, turning them in, losing everything?" I thought about it. The house was gone. The cars were gone. The comfortable life Monica had built with stolen money was gone. My sister was in prison. My wife was somewhere trying to rebuild her life without me, and I was starting over at 59 years old. "No," I said finally, "I don't regret it." "Why not?" I looked at her, this honest woman who worked with her hands and paid her own bills and never asked me to be anything other than what I actually was. "Because for the first time in 30 years, I know who I am." Ruth smiled and reached for my hand. "And who are you, Albert Morrison?" "I'm a man who chooses the truth, even when it's hard, even when it costs everything." As we sat there in the gathering darkness, I realized something that would have surprised the drugged, confused man I'd been for most of my adult life. I was happy, really, genuinely happy, not because I had money or security or a comfortable lifestyle. I was happy because I was free, free from lies, free from manipulation, free from people who claimed to love me while stealing from me. It had taken me almost 60 years to learn the difference between a life that looked good and a life that actually was good. But I'd learned it, and that was worth everything I'd lost.